Good afternoon. It's Global Goodness Day again. You're all very welcome to discuss the futures of technology. New technologies can provide us with some excellent opportunities to enhance sustainability, but there are also some grave threats that we need to deal with. My name is Maija-Riitta Ollila, and I'm happy and proud to introduce our brilliant speakers. First, I would like to welcome Ville Voipio. He's Doctor of Science in Technology, in Measurement Technology to be exact. He's the chair of the board of directors at Vaisala. Currently, he is also the chief technology officer at Vaisala Ltd, a startup digitalizing the heating of buildings. He is also active in the deep technology startup field. Among many other merits, Ville Voipio is also docent in digitalization of primary healthcare at the University of Tampere. His special interest is in climate change mitigation. Ville, you're also a musician, a performing artist. If anyone is into Renaissance music, they can spot you playing viola da gamba in the Kaleidos ensemble. So you're a multi-talent. In that capacity, what would you say, can future technology development be steered or directed in some way? And if so, which agents might be able to do this?
Well, that's a very good question, and I have a very short answer. It is no. Technology development can't be directed. And I demonstrate it to you, because all technology and science is built on the existing technology and science. Now, let me put some existing technology and science on here. You see that it will pile up. And you can only build on what you have here. So if you want to get here, there is no way to jump. If you want to get here, there is no way to jump. So you have a lot of random things, and then you just have something piling up. And that was my first answer. My second answer is yes, you can. If you appreciate these limitations, because you can always move where you're piling up the science and technology on the existing science and technology. Of course, there are some limitations. You can't do it in any direction. And one of the things is that, as in this sugar piling experiment, small things in the microscale, they happen quite randomly. It's very difficult to decide that I want to make that and that innovation. No, you may have some goal and you may find out something, but you will need to have the right people and the right innovation and the right environment. But then in the macro scale, of course, there are drivers which direct the development of science and technology. One thing that must be always kept in mind is that you can't break the laws of physics. Don't try to break the laws of physics. Many people have tried, but it doesn't work. But the drivers or the agents which drive the development of science and technology, the usual suspects of anything, money and power. Money, I would say that commercial technology and power is more in the side of the military technology. We don't have any commercial nuclear bombs, quite luckily, because we don't have any use out of the military use, but the military use has a lot to do with power. Nowadays, fortunately, I think technology is money driven. And why I say fortunately is that there is a simple mechanism behind that, and we can tweak that mechanism. And one important thing about the money is that if you want to have scalable technology, you must make money out of that, or someone has to be able to make money out of that. And I give another example. If you look at flights and flying, in the 70s, there was this big vision of having supersonic passenger flights between the continents. And there was this great British-French Concorde, which actually was an airplane doing that. And that was the first and the only and the last airplane to do that, because there was no demand. And for sure, if we had used these 50 years for developing supersonic passenger flights, we would have a great deal of different airplanes doing that. But money and power, that's my answer.
Well, that's a very concise answer, and I'm glad there was this second part, because if you had stated that there is no steering mechanism, then we would be in real trouble. But what about, are there any social barriers to the use of future technologies? Has ethics anything to do with those restrictions?
Well, the brief answer, yes and yes, but let me elaborate a bit. There are a lot of restrictions and ethical problems, but the restrictions and ethical problems are not necessarily where we are looking for them right now. Artificial intelligence is actually the main problem, not only because I hate the word artificial intelligence, not the artificial part, but the intelligence. Please define intelligence. I don't know. But anyway, systems which exhibit a behavior which is something we think that should be human behavior, not machine behavior. I'll take self-driving cars as an example because it's a low-hanging fruit as an example. We talk about the ethics of self-driving cars, and usually we have this example of the car having to choose between running or hitting two people, and only one of them will be killed. So the car tries to decide whether to run over a philosopher or an engineer, and then that's a big ethical question. Okay, that's an interesting ethical question, but it's completely irrelevant for several reasons. First of all, we know that philosophers will be in short supply, so just run over the engineer. There are too many of us. Anyway, but the second answer here is that this is not a practical choice. It's not a situation that you will face in practice. And then what would a human driver do? And then they will mix accelerator and brake, and depress the accelerator and run over both of them, plus a couple of other people. So the machine will be better. So there is no ethical discussion in that, or not very relevant. But there is another problem, and it has a lot to do with this example, because if you look at our laws, look at our traffic code, and traffic code in almost all legislations around the world starts by the driver has to be reasonable, has to exercise caution. What does it mean? Please define. Cars understand about meters. 5 meters before pedestrian crosswalk, you have to do something. That's fine for a machine, but being cautious, I don't know, because I don't understand it myself. And now we come into a bigger problem. Our legislation is not watertight. Our legislation is based on interpretation. That's why we have courts for. They do this interpretation. Everything they have in the Supreme Court is interpretation. And that's not something that you can tell a machine that, okay, you should interpret this, and you don't know which way because no one knows. If you do something wrong, then we'll go in court and we'll see. So we have to do a lot of work with our legislation. And there is another thing, and that's that our legislative system is built on the idea of someone being punished. The whole idea is that if you break against the laws, you break against some other person, or against the society, you will be punished. Some discomfort will be imposed upon you, and that might be you will be fined, so you lose money, you lose your freedom, you will be jailed, or you, well, depending on the country and era, you lose your member, you lose your hand, or even your head. But that's the idea. But if a self-driving and self-learning car breaks law, whom do we punish? Do we jail the engineers? Do we jail the car? Or do we jail the driver? None of these answers is good. And the same applies to medicine. We are accustomed to people dying because of doctors making mistakes. And that's very human. And that's what we say, it's very human, right? If an artificial intelligence machine learning system makes a mistake and someone dies, do we like it? Nope, I don't think. And here I don't have the answers. I have a lot of questions here, but I think this answers Maija-Riitta's question.
Yes, great questions, and we'll get back to your ideas quite soon. But let me now introduce our second speaker, Toni Ahlqvist. Toni Ahlqvist is professor at the Finland Futures Research Center at the University of Turku. His research focuses on regional planning and policy, spatial political economy, future studies, and technology foresight. His most recent projects have dealt with potential societal antagonisms of radical emerging technologies, futures of land use planning in Finland, and sense-making in organizational and corporate foresight. Toni, welcome. You are an extremely versatile thinker. You're looking at the emerging technologies from many different points of view. And you've said the following: the future of a technology is often viewed with emphasis on its instrumental value. We have believed in the linear evolution and a kind of inevitable triumph of technology. In reality, the development of technologies is contradictory and creates different societal tensions. So, since you are concerned about unequal social and regional impacts of technologies like digitalization, artificial intelligence, which we shouldn't use, sorry, Ville, and synthetic biology, what kind of problems might emerge?
Thank you, Maija-Riitta, for this generous introduction. I try to answer your question briefly, and I also try to remember that where did you take that quote from? Maybe I can myself also locate it. I have usually been talking about three types of societal and spatial impacts of technologies. So the first is instrumental impact. That is sort of like the technical impact around societies, so how we adopt different kinds of technologies, infrastructures and gadgets, and what kind of impacts they have on our daily lives in practice. The second level is systemic impacts. And systemic impacts is a bit more complex twist to this matter. An example of a systemic impact of technologies might be intensification of communication due to mobile technological gadgets. So it leads to two kinds of developments. It can lead to better understanding among people when they communicate more transparently and they can contact people from varied origins. However, this exactly same phenomenon, intensification of communication, could also lead to fragmented echo chambers in which people interact only with their like-minded fellows. So exactly the same kind of development leads to two kinds of results. Then we have a third kind of impact, which is still deeper. We have a cultural impact, and cultural impact is the more deeper impacts technologies have on our culture, economy, and politics. And we could think about our cultural reliance on digitalized information and infrastructure. I think that creates quite a good source for thinking about this cultural impact of technologies. I see that when thinking about technologies, I think that the basic problem here is that discussion about its impacts seems to be following some kind of antagonistic linear perspective. And what I mean by this antagonistic linear perspective is that there are discussions that highlight positive sides of technologies and perceive technologies as a source of great liberation and as a source of immaterial growth and what have you. Then there are other discussions that discuss and emphasize the negative aspects of technologies and perceive technologies as threat to order of things in societies, be they traditional or more modern. And instead, I suggest to take a third passage, which I call a dialectical perspective. It means that we should understand that all technological development is simultaneously both positive and negative in its dimensions, and it is also something in between. And these impacts, they are not spread unevenly. They are not spread evenly. They are not the same in every context, and they are not the same in every location. So my answer is that in principle, all technologies bear potential for utopian and dystopian development, and we should understand that all technologies are simultaneously positive and negative and everything in between. So this is the dialectical understanding of technology.
Thank you. That's interesting. But let's go back to the problems. To solve the potential problems related to technology, we need contributions also from civil society. And now we come to your innovation. You have outlined the idea of new citizen capabilities. What kind of capabilities are we talking about?
Well, I have been talking about new kinds of reading skills that are required for societies. And we have a lot of talk about these kind of new reading skills nowadays. One can call them new literacies. And I would here point out three types of new literacies. The first is futures literacy. That means individual and organizational capacity of constant maneuvering with future potentials and possibilities, even in our mundane practices and everyday contexts. It is the human capacity of constantly orienting towards the future, to find openings and to point out the creative emergence in life. So that's the first sort of capacity. The second capacity is media literacy. And I think this is has become quite evident in now present society. It is a skill to contextualize various media like newspapers, web journals, social media, and so on. It is kind of like a skill of knowing what to swallow, who to trust and who to distrust. And this is quite fundamental skill nowadays. But then there is third skill, which I call critical technology literacy. And I think that this is very important novel skill that citizens should adopt to every extent. Critical technology literacy refers to a capacity to understand the technological context and technological basis of our everyday life. It is kind of like capacity to be able to read what kinds of technological infrastructures and related knowledge channel our lives, and to be able to critically acknowledge and when it is needed to detest and oppose these technological infrastructures also. But I think that this combination of these literacies, so futures literacy, media literacy, and critical technology literacy sums up quite nicely the new citizenship skills that I have been talking about.
Thank you, Toni. Fortunately, we have a third speaker who definitely has the third capability that you mentioned. Kai Kimppa is an adjunct professor, PhD, university research fellow, and the leader of the Future Ethics Research Group at Turku School of Economics of the University of Turku. His research interests as of late are in the fields of games, artificial intelligence, and ethical frameworks for information technology. He's also a contributing member of the Code of Ethics of the Association for Computing Machinery, and the vice chair and national representative of International Federation for Information Processing Technical Committee number 9. Kai Kimppa has participated in several European Union framework programs for research and technological development and other both national and international projects as an ethical advisor. Kai, it's great to have you with us. You call yourself a jack of all trades of ICT. I looked up the meaning of the phrase in a dictionary. A jack of all trades is someone who has skill in many different areas. You might think of yourself as a jack of all trades if you can program computers, fix plumbing, and bake a mean cupcake. I don't know about the cupcakes, but you're definitely a master of independent thought. Actually, you adore independent thought. In your emails, you quote, for example, Richard Feynman. I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. So, Kai, you have stated that preparing for future development scenarios is essential, especially from an ethical perspective. What kind of preparation do you have in mind?
First, I need to maybe clarify a bit of that jack of all trades quote from me. I'm jack of all trades in IT and ethics related questions specifically. That's where I do wide variety of technical areas which I look into. But getting to the question, information technology, which is my area of expertise when it comes to technologies, is in a constant change. New technologies and new applications of old technologies come at a speed to which our legal system just cannot keep up with. Thus, we need both descriptive understanding, so what those technologies actually do, and using analogies or parables is not a good idea, because that more often than not just muddles the picture further. You actually need to understand how the technology works. And of course, we need the normative side, which is the ethical side of thinking on where the technologies are going. In many situations, we have conceptual models in which we do not really understand the possibilities of these technologies. Thus, to be able to discuss them and the consequences they have on our world rationally, we first must understand how they work. Then and only then can we discuss the ethical implications of the upcoming technologies. Ethical thinking, and I don't mean everyday morals, but analytical ethical thinking more often than not. Sometimes I guess the continental ethical thinking is also useful, especially in ethical discussions. The technologies are good, but typically we're using the traditional analytical philosophy ethics, which are consequences, intentions, contracts, and so forth. Those should lead any legislation directing the use of technologies in our society. Of course, at first, when laws are not available, codes of ethics, such as the ACM Code of Ethics, which was already mentioned, can be used as tools for understanding what kind of development we should do and what kind of development we shouldn't do. There are some additional tools to help us analyze and use those codes of ethics, such as COPE or Ethics Canvas, and they, I think, should be standard tools when designing new technologies. Unfortunately, too often they don't seem to be. About the future development and scenarios, I have been a member and am a member in projects which develop future technologies. That is where we try to see to it that those technologies are developed in an ethical way. Of course, we can't know all the potential uses of these technologies, but we can have a reasonably good idea on what they will be used. For example, artificial intelligence, when it's being created to analyze cancer from X-ray pictures of patients, pretty much does that and not much else. Also, if we're developing a system for police to map different areas where crime is more prevalent than in other areas, we've all seen the movies in which that can be misused. Thus, the ethical people are needed to set safeguards that those systems will not be misused in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that you clarified the field of ethics of technology, because sometimes it's difficult to understand what applied ethics actually means. But when you look into the future, what, to your mind, are the most significant ethical challenges of future technologies?
That is a very wide and difficult question to answer, I'm afraid. The best I can think is to include some late examples in which the ethical questions we partly, but only partly understand. And of course, these technologies keep developing to future directions. So we'll have to look into the future direction when we're looking at these. Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, blockchain use all have potential ethical problems. IoT is everywhere, from your cars to rice cookers, from televisions to refrigerators. What kind of changes will this bring to our society? With whom and how and what do they talk, are in contact with? How can we be sure that the consequences from this technology actually benefit us? If we think about car applications, for example, I've heard that people have to reboot their cars before they can use them, and that sounds scary, especially if it happens on a highway, as it has happened. So that kind of problems are the future. We don't know what kind of things this technology will bring with it. Will it affect the automated cars, which were mentioned before, will they affect our societal structures? Will people suddenly leave the downtown areas elsewhere, not just in the United States, because you don't have to drive the car? You can work or sleep or chat with your friends in the car instead of having to drive it. Suddenly, half an hour in a car doesn't seem to be that much, whereas currently it tends to be fairly long commute for anyone, at least in Finland. Blockchain is used mainly, but of course not only, for cryptocurrencies. Although one cannot pay with cryptocurrencies almost anywhere, they are totally incognito, yet every transaction is secure. This makes it extremely easy to use it for shady purposes. But a blockchain is coming to companies as well. Are they actually going to use it in the same or similar way as they are being used in cryptocurrencies? I doubt that. I think there are going to be some organizations which are in charge of that, and that can bring a question of whether they are actually truthful or rather just dominated by the organization which uses them. There are other potential problems with cryptocurrencies, but for the time, I will not go into them. Blockchain. Artificial intelligence can be used from facial recognition to weapons systems, from analysis of health data to employment decisions. We know that employment decisions, for example, at Amazon, discriminated against women when in employment. We have an understanding that especially if artificial intelligence is given, so to say, free range in weapons technology, there's going to be problems. What kind of applications are we going to see there? To answer the Ville, I think it was it Toni or Ville who said that artificial intelligence is a bad word, and I agree. Nonetheless, and who do we hold responsible for that? It's a difficult question, but it's a case-by-case question. There cannot be a general answer. For the weapons system, if you release it, you're responsible for it. It doesn't matter who designed it. Don't use a system you don't understand what it does when its potential is to kill other people. Whereas with the car, I don't think the driver, because he or she is not the driver, they are passengers. They can't be responsible because they don't do anything. They just sit there. So all of these changes are partly already here, but they are only now becoming parts of our societies, and we still haven't seen what the future developments in these areas actually will bring.
Thank you, Kai. You're doing fine. I love my role in this discussion because I can ask impossible questions and ask you to anticipate the unknown unknowns. But great. Ville was already challenged by Kai, but I would still like to go back to the climate change mitigation idea. Because Ville, why exactly is climate change something that needs to be addressed through technology and business?
Well, that's a good question, but there are two parts of it, and I'll answer the technology part first. Due to how we use energy in our society, we have two different paths we can take. One of them is the path of radical degrowth. So we will have to stop doing something we're doing at the moment. We will remember that we are only 1 billion people in wealthy countries, and then we have the 6 billion people who want to get wealthy, and they want to use more energy, which means that we will cut our energy expenditure even more. If we want to stop using fossil fuels and live without taking technology in wider use. And the problem here is not that it will become cold and dark. That's something we can live with, right? But then it will mean that there is no Instagram, there is no Netflix. And that's something we can't live with. So the other route is that we will try and find and take advantage of the existing technology that helps us producing the energy with smaller emissions, helps us use less energy. And I don't believe in degrowth, as I said, because of the Netflix and Instagram argument. And I don't believe it's politically viable. Now we have to remember that all big measures have to be taken by politicians, and the politicians are re-elected or not re-elected every 4 years. And that's a big problem. But instead of not believing in degrowth, I believe in technology, and I believe in some human properties. We have some very nice properties in our characters, such as greed, envy, selfishness. And the nice thing about them is that they're renewable. There is no lack of them. They're not going to disappear anywhere. And what I'm saying here is actually I'm talking about market economy. Our market economy is based on the idea that all actors try to maximize their profits. And that along with the human character makes it a very, very, very valuable tool. So if the market economy is built so, that is, if the policymakers make the regulations, the laws, so that they incentivize creating climate-friendly technology, then that's what businesses are going to do. I'm not saying that businesses weren't aware of ESG, of environmental, social, and governance issues. Yes, they are. But I emphasize that there must be profit associated with any scalable technology. If you have energy-saving technology, you have climate-friendly technology, and you want it to scale, it does not scale if there is no money in it. So it's for us bad market economy people to make profit. When we make profit, then we make that technology. And then it's up to policymakers to make the policies, make the regulations, and make them in the long term. Please remember that in the energy sector, we talk about 50 years or something. So just if we have regulation that's changing all the time, or a quilt work, a patchwork of something, then it doesn't work.
Well, I must say that your ideas about human nature are not overly idealistic, but given this view on human nature, I must admit that you're quite right. But in these circumstances, how would you say that we should produce sustainable technology?
Well, I think the first step here is stop producing non-sustainable technology. That's the first thing. I think this is something, and okay, I talked a lot about market economy, but this is also, this has something to do with engineering ethics. We must build the idea of producing sustainable technology into all technology we develop, everything we do as engineers, as people who make innovations and design things. So that's the kind of the basic level where we have to get. And I think we are getting, because I have to say that young people seem to be brighter than us less young people. But then maybe we're talking about creating technology which has a huge handprint. That is something that helps reduce the carbon footprint. So the technology itself is good in that sense. And there I think you can take two different roads. You can try to make a small improvement in some of the big things, such as energy use in industry or in building or in buildings or so, because they are huge carbon footprints. And if you can make even a small reduction there, you have a very big handprint. Or the other way around, you can take something that has a small footprint, but you can take 90% out of it. And then still your impact is big. Then we have the two other combinations, small on small, small improvement in something small. Yes, that's nice, but not worth talking about. And then we have this big improvements on big issues. And the other problem is that I don't really see where you could do it. I have exactly one example, and that's fusion power. If you can create a viable, commercially viable and technological viable fusion power, then yes, we can cut the emissions of the energy sector by a great deal, and that's a great sector. But it's far away, and someone is already using tens of billions of euros to do that. So these kind of innovations are something that people are looking for right now. But then one thing is that I come back to the laws of physics. Again, remember the laws of physics, but now in the sense that try to understand when you create technology, try to understand what impact it has. And most often it's the energy use during use. And here I take another example. I take computer algorithms as an example, because we know that within a few years we'll use 20% of all energy to the ICT sector. That's a huge amount, and that's algorithms running somewhere. So I'm not saying this is the case. So, but to have a real example, I talk about Microsoft Word, because we all are using Microsoft Word. If there was an inefficient algorithm in Microsoft Word running now and then, it would consume a huge amount of energy in total, and it would have a huge carbon footprint. And this is something that, for example, I don't think the programming industry has yet realized that their impact is large. So somewhere the energy is going.
Thank you. That was an avalanche of ideas again. Let's hear what Toni thinks about this. Now that you're a futurist, what kind of expectations of technological change do futurists talk about these days?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think that technological expectations, as future studies scholars are talking about, then can be roughly categorized into two basic groups. So firstly, we have domain-specific expectations that vary quite significantly across the technological domains. For example, you can take different technological expectations in the fields of artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and energy technologies. In these domains, one can talk about different kinds of novel technological solutions, artifacts, and services that could be emerging. In the field of synthetic biology, one can speculate about domain-specific changes these technologies could catalyze. For example, in synthetic biology, the CRISPR-Cas9 technology has been such a catalyst of new innovation. Or one can contemplate developments in artificial intelligence and also think about more wider economic and social transformations these new solutions could catalyze. However, there are also other kinds of expectations, what I call archetypical expectations. And with archetypical technology expectations, I refer to a sort of meta-level expectations. They are expectations that seem to be just around the corner when the hype, so technology hype, is at its highest peak, but somehow these expectations are never fully realized. Instead, these expectations are constantly built again, and they are projected to the near future or further to the future. I have a couple of examples about these archetypical expectations. I have recently analyzed future-oriented articles and public discussions in connection to AI expectations, so expectations about artificial intelligence, both in 1980s and in 2010s. In 1980s, AI solutions were also called expert systems. It might be quite surprising that these expectations, when you compare them, have strikingly similar features when it comes to certain technological properties, like presumption of general intelligence, the ability of AI to communicate, or the ability of AI to be creative, and so on. In many writings in 1980s, these features were assumed to be right around the corner, just as they are expected to be near future in today's artificial intelligence-related discussion. So this is kind of like an example of an archetypical expectation. The second example could be from biotechnology. So we had previous bio-hype in 1990s in Western economics, and we have had a sort of at least small scale of hype with synthetic biology in 2010s due to this CRISPR-Cas9 technology and its new kind of promises. So we have these constantly oscillating expectations of related to certain industrial and technological fields. And then third example could be a sort of eternal promise of nanotechnology. Nanotechnology has been high in the list of tomorrow's disruptions for a long time, but the killer applications have not been realized, and the impact has been more implicit in culture and technology. So what to say about this? That we humans have a tendency to project vast transformation expectations to technologies such as intelligent artificial intelligence or total cure for cancer or all diseases. On the one hand, this rationality and this expectation structure springs from the innovation pressures of capitalist economic system or market economy, but on other hand, it is a deep characteristic of human psyche. So archetypical expectations are also deeply cultural. Who wouldn't like to have an intellectual communication with artificial entities? It would be nice to travel in time through wormholes, or even to understand what our universe really is. And so these archetypes come deeply from history and from our deep culture. So this is my answer to this very interesting question.
I definitely recognize the phenomenon. When I was 16, our physics teacher told us that fusion energy is just around the corner. And I'm not exactly 16 now. But one thing that we talk about every day is the labor market of tomorrow. So how do you see the relationship between human labor and new technologies in the future?
Again, as I'm an academic, I start with a few research references. So in the last 5 to 10 years, there are a lot of analysis about futures of work in different domains, in domains of academia, in political field, and also in consultancy field. And especially this analysis have focused on digitalization of working life and on artificial intelligence. And there are at least 2 kinds of reports that one can find. Some analysis argue for more fundamental changes call that entire professions, like even profession of lawyer or different kinds of expert professions could change fundamentally. Some studies have been more moderate and they talk about changing elements in working life and then more static elements. And I have been a futurist for like 20 or plus years, and it's like 20 or 30 years ago, it was very common for futurists by newspapers especially were asked to name different kinds of new professions that could emerge. And I have also participated a couple of exercises that have given lists of new professions, and we were inventing them and depicting them. Usually these professions had very creative and catchy names like artificial organ designer or web gardener, and these kind of creative combinations. Of course, these sound quite funny nowadays, but the main idea of these kind of exercises is quite important. They are kind of like speculative thought exercises that do not actually argue that reality would be like this, that we would have, just these kind of professions, but they open up the idea that future can be something totally different than today. So it's an act of opening alternative futures. When it comes to the working life, I tend also to favor this kind of dialectical approach. So I see that some elements of working life might change even fundamentally, but there are more static elements that will provide balance to these changes. Some professions might disappear or change form, but I think that human creativity is still the core in many professions, and this creative aspect could be realized also in cooperation with artificial intelligence assistant or digital twins modeling our reality, and we learn to interact with these kind of technologies. Simultaneously, I think that a lot of professions could stay relatively the same. Think about, restaurant chefs, think about barbers and so on. And then in the end, I think that it's also an interesting question relating also to the answer Ville gave, that if we go for radical degrowth, will we face a return of traditional craft skills if we are really forced to change our lifestyles and become more small scale and self-reliant in our living structures? So will there be a sort of like a re-emergence of traditional skills? That's also quite interesting question when it comes to the future of work.
Thank you. What about Kai? What do you think about how does the information technology impact work life now and in the future, now that you're a jack in all trades in information technology?
Unfortunately, as Toni also already mentioned, that there are some directions that are typically very negative. I'm afraid that might be the case here. We ethicists are a bit like Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings. we come with the bad news on which need to be heard nonetheless. It's quite clear that ICTs have impacted our lives in many positive ways, but they also changed our lives negatively. And lately, the work-life balance aspect, in my view, has been one of those areas in which it's been the direction has not been a good one. It suffered because we're available all the time and everywhere. We are swamped with different messaging systems, from email to WhatsApp, from Teams to Zoom, from Facebook to Discord, from Instagram to Twitter. Quickly counting, I use at least 10 systems just to keep in contact with others currently. And I have quit all social media, well, except LinkedIn, which I don't really use for social media purposes anyway. It's impossible to manage all of them. We have to be in the Zoom meeting 15 to 20 minutes before it starts if we are speakers, because of the simple reason that there are so many applications that we use that we can't really master any of them to the degree that we would need to be actually efficient users. And of course, as Toni also said, and now we know, previously we suspected, but the data is now in. The social media tends to bubble us into our own echo chambers. And these chambers, when they are not all that bad, still only strengthen our preconceived notions, but at worst can lead to social unrest or even suicides or things like that. We are also our own secretaries. I want that artificial intelligence secretary, but rather I would take an intelligent secretary if that was possible, because my time handling skills are horrible. So I'm always late or lost or doing something else than I was supposed to be doing. But we are also our own travel agents. We report our time use, we are grading officers, etc. All these things have come on top of the actual work that we should be doing, largely because information technology. It's so easy to do all that yourself, possibly, but it's away from the time we actually do meaningful work. At times they are practical, as I said, but oftentimes we really need to learn them again and again. Well, the user interfaces are extremely difficult to use. Healthcare systems are a case in point. Most of them take more time, which is away from patient work, or even have mistaken fields and require workarounds. HUS's late system being a case in point. But this is true, of course, elsewhere as well. We had the most horrible travel system in use in Turku. It should have been a red flag to the person who purchased it that the company who sold that travel system didn't use that travel system. It's like Microsoft using Apple products for development. That would not necessarily be a good sign on their trust on their own systems. This Corona time has, of course, brought ever-present meetings to our lives. How can we say no when there is even no reason to travel? But are we really achieving anything sitting in one meeting after another? Unfortunately, I see these problems rather strengthening in the future than lessening. More and more, this kind of technologies are coming all the time, and different organizations and different groups, especially with cross-organizational cooperation, want to use one program or another, or a third, or a fourth. And we're stuck with a lot of different systems, which all take time away from our actual work.
Very convincing words. However, I'm very worried about the reputation of ethicists now. We seem to be a rather gloomy lot. So let's try to find some positive notes, because ethicists have been talking about well-being and happiness. They are everlasting topics of interest. Our moral pursuit is to alleviate suffering and increase happiness. Could you please find some positive ideas about future technologies from this point of view? Of course, if you can't, there's nothing I can do.
Well, we need to be careful with what applications we let into our lives. We need to control the ones which don't bring happiness to us. There is no pressing reason to friend everyone in Facebook. I don't actually use that anymore. I figured that it actually made my life worse than it made my life good. I call the people who I want to talk with, or send them text messages or whatever. So be careful to only use the ones in your free time. At work, it's more difficult to choose what you can use and make that actually enhance your well-being and make your life more manageable, rather than bring new unnecessary tasks, new unnecessary bubbles, new unnecessary ways of getting, if not enraged, at least annoyed by things. We don't need as much annoyance in our lives as a lot of social media tends to bring. Twitter, I think, is probably one of the worst places to be, because there are always Twitter quarrels on one thing or another. So be careful and selective. Unfortunately, the applications which affect our everyday life is typically not something which can be ethically directed. So we can't direct typically the organizations who make these, but they're only legislated afterwards. So again, unfortunately, these changes often come late, and as the technologies have already become mainstream, changing them is extremely difficult, especially in cases where the organizations have already vast amounts of money, the applications have become mainstream applications, and so splitting the organizations or even limiting their work tends to be time consuming and difficult. So unfortunately, I'll need to end with a rather sad note.
Well, I don't believe that, because now that you have enlightened us about all the problems, then we'll definitely make wise choices and somehow find a better way. But now that the pictures of Ville and Toni are back, I'm positively surprised. You did not leave us yet, and I would like you now take the opportunity to comment one another. Kimppa has already started, and I'm sure that you have plenty of ideas to share.
Well, maybe I'm the quickest one here, sorry, not the most polite. To Kai, I would like to add to what you said about the technology and the horrible user interfaces and horrible user experience. I think we should have two different ideas, and we should keep them separate. One of them is what the technology is doing, what the technology is capable of doing, and how it is implemented. Because the user interface stuff, I know it very well. I was doing a rather large review research on the usability of EHR electronic health record systems, and there were some usability studies, and I still have nightmares after reading them. But I think that's a technological problem, not in the great scale, but in the scale that the way we think user interfaces is sometimes very strange. So it's something that can be solved, whereas my point of view very often is this something that can be done. And I like to keep these two things separate. And Toni, I really love your idea of the new citizenship, because it kind of clarifies the thinking of what kind of things we need to think as a society and also as individuals in the society, because now we have this great discussion which has a lot of great information, at least from you two, and we have 39 participants here, and then we have about 7 billion people who do not participate, and there must be some way to kind of spread this discussion.
No worries there. We'll spread this material to all those who are still not knowing what you're saying. We'll find them. Others, what do you like to comment?
Yeah, maybe I could comment. Firstly, maybe to Ville. I like very much your statement about where you were talking about all technology development needs to be sustainable, because I think that this is the right way to approach this problem. I think that once this kind of aim is targeted at, I think the market economy could really be of benefit to the entire world, because we wouldn't be developing any harmful or create artificial sort of piles of similar things. Because I think that the basic problem with market economy in that sense is that it creates unnecessary sort of overlaps. So it creates a lot of similar things that are almost similar, and it wastes our resources basically when we are at the the process of selecting the best available product or the standard design. And I think that if all of these standard design applicants would be sustainably developed, I think the problem would be much lesser. And I like this idea very much to fit all the activities of economy and technology development inside planetary boundaries. I think that's very good. And to Kai, I really much endorse your perspectives on these technologies and of this university level hassle with different kinds of applications. And I also think that somehow we have too many applications nowadays, and we have to come up with the kind of like some kind of meta level solution that combines. We have a meta level social media that would combine every social media into some kind of information set that is tailored for you. And maybe we need this kind of artificial intelligence or intelligence assistant to that kind of purpose. But I think that we are in some kind of Jurassic explosion now, or Neolithic explosion, where there are a lot of technologies and there are too many, as there are too many material artifacts also in the world, which creates the unsustainable situation of the economy. So just these comments. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a chat comment and question. Ideas first. Please do not weaponize artificial intelligence. And remember Kranzberg rule. Technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So anything also can be weaponized in a certain context, for example, my coffee cup. This ethical forum or platform or ethical space is interesting to focus on alongside the as yet unimagined technologies. I'm glad we have inspired chat comment. Others are welcome. And Kai wants to comment.
Sure. The cup can be used as a weapon. The thing with that is, however, that any and all technologies that we develop have inbuilt values in them. Sometimes those values are ethical values. More often they tend to be either general values or profit-driven values. So there are, but they always have some values built into them. The difference between using a cup as a weapon and using a nuclear bomb as a weapon is that the nuclear bomb is specifically meant for that. You could probably use a nuclear bomb for setting out your fishing equipment in the sea, but unfortunately it would not be very good for that, and that's not the designed purpose. Easier examples are, for example, mobile phones. I mean, the mobile phones or multi-purpose device these days, I guess, the main use is connectivity. Like Nokia used to say, connecting people, when I was working there at least. Well, we had an inside joke disconnecting the workers inside Nokia, but whatever. But that purpose also is inbuilt into it. And of course, we can hack things and we can modify them for other purposes, and we can use them for surprising purposes, but that's not what they're meant for. And can I say a couple of comments to Ville and Toni if we don't have any questions? All right. first to Ville about the usability question in technology. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be solved, even if it is basically a technological question. I was a usability engineer in my first life, and I saw again quite a bit of user interfaces, and even with these modern phones, which tend to be easy to use for most things, some things are just impossible to find unless you know what you're looking for and from where. You need to understand the, like, I don't know if it was you or Toni who said that we need to understand and critically be able to evaluate our technologies before we can actually use them. The same is true in this case. We need to understand what we're looking for us to be able to find the answers to it. But on the more interesting question, I guess the technology becoming useful, slow technology, slow tech is something that, for example, Norberto Patrignani and Diane Whitehouse have written about, judging the length of the time technology is useful. Of course, corporations don't want to do that, because if you sell only one of whatever you're doing and never sell another, your company is going to go bankrupt eventually. But of course, we could possibly, through legal means, we could have legal requirements that devices have to last a certain time. And we do actually. For example, for home appliances, it doesn't matter if your washing machine has 2-year warranty or a 5-year warranty, it has to work for 7 years. That's a requirement. It's all the same what the company that's made it says to you. It has to last for 7 years. Otherwise, it's not according to the law. And the Toni, the economies we live in would have to change quite a bit for handcraft to come back as a major work possibility for people. I think we'd probably have to have some kind of a Star Trek world in which all need for work have disappeared. Unfortunately, I rather see a more dim world in the future, the kind of that we see in cyberpunk rather than in Star Trek. Big corporations owning everything and having a worker class which is useless. We already have that to a degree. I mean, the unemployment rates are so high that I remember back in the day when we had a crisis of unemployment, when we had 2.6% unemployment. Now that would be such a wonderfully low percentage if we ever could get to that. The changes haven't looked good, and I don't think they look good in the future. And finally, a small comment again to Toni. There used to be an application which actually combined chat programs, but the interfaces are now impossible to do that anymore. So yeah, good luck with that. Let's hope it can be done. I'm not holding my breath. I may end up keeling over.
Thank you. Tolstoy used to say that what is said first and last will be remembered best. So now there is time for one final concluding idea that will engrave your ideas to other people's minds. So who wants to end?
Okay, I will end. I think the most important thing to understand is that we have a lot of options. We have a lot of possibilities. We have a lot of different futures where we can head, and it is in our hands. But we must be careful, as what Kai says, as what Toni says, the future is not all bright. There are things we have to be careful of. But I'm an optimist. Maybe I'm the only optimist here. But I'm an optimist, and my optimism is based on our ability to create new technology and our ability to understand at this point the ethical questions and the social questions that will arise in the future, and that we can actually react right now. And that's why we have this webinar right here.
Thank you. That was a great ending, the best possible. And now it's time to thank our wonderful panelists for their great contributions And thank you also our technical team, Nina and Jolita. And thank you all participants of the webinar. We'll meet again on the 9th of November, when our topic will be how to implement global change. More optimism needed then. So welcome back in November, and while preparing for the future, it's important to enjoy the present. Take care.